Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 27 of the Microgreen Thumbcast. I'm your host, Mike, as always, and as always, joining me is the co-host, Andy. Today, we're excited to welcome our special guest, Chris Thoreau. Chris is a microgreen expert, creator of Seed Leaf, and he's now some innovation research in his microgreen research lab. Chris is working on evolutionizing how we grow and understand microgreens, influence ability of agriculture, and beyond. In this episode, we'll dive deep in the world of microgreens, research discussed the importance in exploring key steps and taking a closer look at Chris's unique research he's doing. So let's get started. Chris, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you today. And if you are not familiar with Chris, as you should be, Chris is probably one of the OGs of business of microgreens. Give us a little bit of background about yourself, Chris.
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the show. I'm pretty stoked to be talking about research and making use of this space. Let's try and make a long story short. I first got into microgreens through wheatgrass in about 1999, I believe. And then around 2006, 2007, I started growing them commercially for the first time as part of my farming operations when I was running a small-scale organic vegetable farm. And then when I moved from the farm to the city to go back to school, and I needed a way to continue farming because there was a sort of irony in leaving the farm to go do an agricultural degree. And I really saw microgreens as the only way to do that. A lot of people were doing urban farming in different yards and things like that, but the economic model didn't make sense to me. And I knew the yield and returns on microgreens were sort of had the potential. So, I started off doing it. Actually, my whole microgreens commercial career actually started off as a research project as part of my degree at the University of British Columbia. And for a few years was just sort of a summer thing that I did. And then that was 2009 to 2012. And then in 2013, we got some funding to build a greenhouse shipping container, which allowed us to push our production year round. And that was through then working with the Vancouver Food Peddlers Cooperative. So we grew microgreens year round and distributed it to restaurants, grocers, wholesalers, and farmers markets by bike. So there was a whole sort of, we were growing organically, microgreens in the city, delivering by bike, really trying to hit a whole bunch of different aspects to draw people in. I did that till about 2017 when I left to do some other research projects, but stayed involved with microgreens through that whole time. So developing Seed Leaf and then also doing research projects since, and doubling down on research in the last year or so, doing quite a bit. So.
Awesome. Great. So great background, been in this for a very long time. So how do you think researching in microgreens can shape the future of the industry?
Oh, well, that's interesting. The one thing, research does a lot of things, but one of the things that it does that's quite important, I think, for everybody is it generates data. And these data are useful in helping people make decisions. So sometimes it's quantitative data. You've got numbers, sowing rates, yields, things like that. And sometimes it's qualitative data. So really looking at, observing certain patterns, observing disease issues, things like that. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of conflicting information out there about, again, sowing rates, yields, methods. And so research helps sort of, one thing it does is defines things in a way and gives you a very clear methodology. So like we got this yield with this sowing rate at this temperature on this, crop cycle. So once you have that stuff more sort of dialed in, the information becomes a little more reliable. And I'll be honest, we're on a lot of forums together and I see people post things and often I'm like, that's not true. You are clearly making that. And part of me is like, you're such a skeptic. And then the other part of me is, remember, it's the internet. People do that. And so I do like to have that data, and I like when people share their data. That data-driven approach really helps make the information you provide or share more reliable.
Awesome.
And Chris, I was always incredibly impressed with the container setup that you guys had, considering you're growing, in Canada in the cold. What kind of research stuff did you have to do in there to make sure that you could actually successfully operate year round inside of that operation?
Well, I mean, it was a if you build it, hopefully it works project. But I knew a couple of things. I knew from working in different greenhouse spaces that, you know, the sun can passively heat the space really well on sunny days, even in cold weather. And I knew because our container was smaller than a typical greenhouse, you know, we had lighting and we had heating in there, that we should be able to maintain that heat. We definitely had to adjust as we went. But yeah, it was kind of, you know, hoping that it would work. We worked with a greenhouse specialist who was also a welder that I'd worked with on other projects that helped us do the design. And after that, it was a little bit of trial and error, really just trying to dial things in. It took us a while to be able to keep the temperature up. And there, you know, there you've got a couple of options. Do you add more watts in power, or do you insulate better? So we insulated the bottom third of the container because we didn't need light there. So we were able to do those things, and over time we got it dialed in where we could easily keep, you know, our winter temperatures, you know, 28 to 30 degrees Celsius in the day, maybe 18 to 20 at night, and keep our costs reasonable in that regard. So yeah, there was a lot of just drawing from experience, a bit of trial and error, and then a little bit of like, fingers crossed, let's hope this works.
There's a lot of that in the world of business and in the world of growing microgreens. Kind of, let's see if this works. For sure.
Sometimes you have to just jump in.
Yeah. What are some of the most pressing questions is there in the microgreens research today?
I mean, that's really going to vary with the growers. Can we come back to that?
Sure.
And the reason why is I was going to share, so we can talk about some of the stuff we talked about, and then I was going to share sort of 3 of the research projects I'm doing and why I do those specific ones. And I think that might be a nice lead into that. So I don't know that there's anything pressing, but I do see some gaps. And I think one of the things is people come into microgreens like it's this isolated sort of thing. Like, I need to come in and figure a bunch of stuff out. My background is as a farmer, and my academic education is in agriculture. So I approach microgreens as an agriculturist. And so I don't want to reinvent the wheel or try and figure things out. So much of this stuff is figured out in other sectors, the greenhouse sector, the cannabis sector, all these things. And so it's important that we draw from that stuff, so we're not doing a bunch of research that's actually already been done. So I think that the crucial thing is understanding that, like, drawing from the information that's there, which is a crucial part of research, which I'll touch on in a bit.
Perfect. Yep, we could have to circle back to that for sure. Can you share any examples that have led you to surprising discoveries for you throughout this?
I mean, one of the projects I want to talk about is a new seeding method, which has been. I went into it thinking, I want this to work. I don't think it's going to work. And then surprisingly, I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome. There's that. One of the other ones I'll talk about is lighting. And part of that is just understanding where the gaps are and how my approach to that research is going to change. And then I do a lot of trials, like with seeding rates and yields. And I mean, through that, I've changed some of my long-standing sort of methods. One with sunflower, I've increased my sowing rate substantially, and with pea, I've brought it down. And these are things, as a researcher, I was reluctant to do. It's like, I've already got this stuff dialed in, but I dialed this stuff in a long time ago, and in different systems, and my methods have changed. So I like that I have an idea going in, and then I can come out of the research going, all right, well, now I've got a new perspective on how to grow this crop. I get a little attached to my methods, but it's really helping me, let go of that. And that's really what good research is. I mean, not to be like arrogant, but the key thing in any research is to challenge what you think. Otherwise, you just end up in this confirmation bias situation where I'm just going to make it so this seeding rate is the best. And that's easy to do, even subconsciously. So really, I go into it really open-minded to see what happens. And that's shifting my views all the time.
That's a very good point too, because I think a lot of microgreen growers, they get a number off the internet from somebody that they know they can rely on, and they run with that and they stick with that. And like you said, they adjust their environment and they try and make it work. And oftentimes it may not even be right for what they're actually trying to do. So I'm always impressed with your work. Your sunflower, when you did the extra weight, I think that was probably about 6 or 8 months ago. I was blown away by how when you stacked on, I don't remember, it was like 25 or 30 pounds, and the sunflower grew even better than they ever had. I thought that was really kind of crazy. So just neat to see things that, most people would never even bother trying. So it's definitely cool, man. We appreciate it.
Yeah, sunflower was the crop I started with, and in 2009, when I did my first year of commercial production, I went to the farmers market, I sold to grocers, and I had one crop. I had sunflower shoots, and that was it. And I did play around with it a lot, and so I've always been enamored with it because it's always been such an impressive and hardy and vigorous crop. And that year in particular, the seed I had was this hybrid seed from a US company, and I've never had seed as good since. It was the most incredible seed, and I had done that method then, and kind of came back to it. But yeah, like sunflower, I have in mind to do a trial somehow one day where I have this big, massive tray of sunflower with a big board on it, and I lay on it for 5 days until it pushes me up, So because it's and that stuff, it sounds impressive, but it's easy. The sunflower does that without even thinking about it, and so do other crops. I mean, they're if you think about just the combined power of all those little shoots, pushing that weight up means nothing at all.
Awesome. Designing trials. Could you walk us through the process of designing an effective trial, especially focusing on some detailed aspects?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'll start up with the idea of why there's different reasons to do research, and it could be for learning something new or whatever. But really, research starts with you have a question, and people might think like, what if I just want to grow something to see what happens? And I mean, that's fine, but usually you have a question within that. What does growing this crop look like? What happens if I sow it at this rate? What happens if I do this with the light? All these things. There's always a question there. So the first step in research is to have a question, because if you don't have a question, then what are you doing? You're just basically doing something for the sake of it. So the question drives the research. And without the question, you don't know how to do the research because you don't know what you're actually going to do. You can't just say, well, I'm just going to grow microgreens. If you're doing a light experiment or a temperature experiment, then you need to be able to record that data. And so again, you need to have the question to drive things. So that's the first place to start. And I have lots of questions, which we'll go into.
Awesome.
So, I was going to go. Can I?
No, go ahead. Keep going.
Yes. So I was going to say, so the next thing is, I like to have an expected answer for that question, which in research we call a hypothesis. And one of the standards is like this idea of a null hypothesis. I'm going to do this with one rep, and I'm going to do this with something else, and they're going to be the same. I'm going to sow this seeding rate and this seeding rate, and they'll be the same. And this is the null hypothesis. There's no difference. And then you try and prove that wrong. Well, this one was at 28.5 grams, and this was at 30 grams seeding rate. The 30-gram one yielded more. Therefore, that's what I expected, and that's what I saw. So that's the second thing. You have a question, then you have an idea of what you think is going to happen. Now, driving that is, you don't want to start from scratch. I mean, when I do any trial, I always go out and find out what information is there already. So, I have enough experience that if I want to grow a crop and test a sowing rate, I check my past sowing rates. What did I sow my sunflower at, my pea at, my broccoli? Easy in that regard. And then I go out and I check what other people are doing. So I spend a lot of time on the forums. I Google things. I have sort of like 3 or 4 references I go to sort of compare them. So I don't want to start from scratch, and especially if it's a crop I haven't grown. I hadn't grown amaranth. I hadn't grown beets before. So it's like, okay, well, where do I start with these? So that's really important. I can't develop a hypothesis without having a sense of where things are at. And so sometimes you're like, okay, this person says sow amaranth at 8 grams, and this person says 20 grams. Holy shit. I mean, that's twice the amount of seed. So, and then I start narrowing it down, and then it's like, well, I'm going to draw from my experience here. And it's like, nobody is saying this and nobody's saying that. So I try to find a sweet spot and do that. So yeah, really having an hypothesis and then drawing from the information that's out there. And from that, that's how I design the trial. So a couple things with designing the trial. One is I really design it for real world conditions. I mean, Andy, if you're trying to figure out how stuff grows in your space there, You don't do the trials at home in your garage.
Yeah.
Even if you get the conditions the same, they're not going to be quite the same. So ideally, you're doing that in your growing space. Now, that can be hard if your space is tight. It can be tough to do both. So part of this is just making sure you have everything recorded so you know what your conditions are. So I have this list of, like, I always have my crop, the variety, the supplier and the lot number, the sowing rate, the temperature and humidity, what type of soil I'm using. And those are sort of the basics. I have light values. So there's 3 things I need to know about my light. What's the like ppfd, or the amount of light I'm getting? What's the color of that light? And then what's the duration of that light on a daily basis in terms of how much time it's on? Any of those things changes and the results can change. And then I need to know my crop cycle, my days in germination, my overall days to maturity, if I'm using the blackout method, how much weight I'm using, all that stuff. And then the last thing is yield. Like, what is my yield with this? Assuming that's what I need to measure. There's not many trials I do where the yield doesn't get measured, to be honest. And then just general observations and anomalies. How fast things germinated. Was there disease? Was there discoloration? Was there leaf curl? Things like that. Now, all that stuff is important because your research is only really good if it can be replicated. So if I do a research project and Andy is like, well, I want to see what that looks like in my system, he needs to know all that stuff so he can design his trial the same way. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for him to get similar results. So that's a key thing, is having that information. I think a lot of us there's some data geeks out there, and maybe we want to record a bunch of stuff, but if you're recording something data-wise, you need to have a reason for that. There are things that I don't record, and maybe I'm missing out, but it takes time and energy and money, basically, to record things, to document it, to do all that stuff. So unless I have a use for it, I don't record it. So that's sort of, like having a question, having an idea of what the results of your trial will be, and then designing that trial to sort of account for all that stuff. You need to think about how you're going to take measurements, and you need to limit how many things you try to do at one time. I can't figure out, like, what's the optimum lighting time, color, soil mix, soil depth, all at once. You do things, you're looking at 1, maybe 2 things at once. Because if you change too many things as you're doing different variations, you don't know what change has made the change in your results. So we need to be very careful with that. And then key out of all of this, and if you don't do this, there's almost no point in doing the research, is you need to replicate your trials. So you can't just do 1 tray of this, 1 tray of that, 1 tray of that, and compare them. You need to do at least 2, and ideally you do 3. So the 2 allows you to take an average, allows you to see differences if there was difference in your grow space. On any of your benches, people are familiar with these benches here. This spot here on the bench is going to be a little different than below or towards the inside, just because of the lighting and this like that. And I do account for that by moving stuff around. But yeah, without the replicates, if something, if you're not observing and realizing, oh, the stuff on the edge always does a little worse, you might have results that are not as a result of your seed, for example, but of your experimental method. So the replicates are key. And if you can do 3 of everything, there's more advanced data analysis you can do as well. So yeah, there's lots of stuff in there. I don't want to get into that because nobody's trying to do a PhD thesis with the research. You just want to find some basic information out. So doing 2 of everything is usually fine. Okay, so those are sort of the first 3 things. I mean, quickly after that is like really good record keeping. So you need a spreadsheet for your data collection. You want to have photos and videos. I do so many photos at different stages. And then right out of high school chemistry, you need to write a trial report. Now, people might be like, well, why do I need that? And I'll tell you why. Because you're going to go back and you're going to look at your data and you're not going to be able to make sense of it at all. The data is just numbers. So when you're looking at, like, okay, well, let's look at these numbers and let's go back and look at our photos and let's go back and look at our comments. I mean, I just do all that in real time. So I have a report. It's got like an introduction and the methodology and the results and the charts and all that stuff. And I go back to that stuff all the time. And sometimes I go back and something's not there. I'm like, ugh, I don't know what to do with this data. I mean, I see this sowing rate was better, but what happened there that, this doesn't meet with what I thought. So if you don't have that information, you're going to do that. You've got to do that report writing to make your trials and your experiments actually worth it. And I think some people are probably reluctant to do that. But yeah, that's kind of key. And I just have a template I follow. So it's just like the same thing every time, copy and paste. It doesn't have to be a whole thing. And sometimes it's mostly just bullet points. And then last, like you conduct your trial, you record your results, taking photos, doing stuff in real time. And then once you do your harvest and collect your data, you need to analyze and interpret that data. And with that, you're always going back to your hypothesis. So I do all these sowing rate yield trials, and I try to guess, like, this is where I think the sowing rate is going to peak. And I'll talk about peak sowing rate later, but I try and guess from my experience, and then I hope that my results match that. And if not, I try to look into that. And the results aren't always conclusive because the averages sometimes make things all over the place. And sometimes they're just beautiful. It's like a perfect trial. You get this beautiful curve and it does what it's supposed to do. And it's like, okay, done. I mean, that's that for that crop. That's kind of worked out. So yeah, those are kind of like the 6 major steps when I'm doing something. And then usually, I mean, it's very rare that I get everything in that first go. So the next thing after that is, in my next trial, what do I need to change? Something wasn't right. So maybe I need to be more careful about my seeding rate. The range of seeding rates wasn't right. I didn't go high enough, or I didn't go low enough. So I don't know if I've hit my peak. The watering was off. I mean, I got disease. I mean, I've done so many beet trials, and just like I uncover them from germination. I'm like, okay, that trial's done, because they're just all dead. So yeah, there's almost always a follow-up. So that's key. As opposed to, oh, those beets are all dead, my trial has failed. Well, no, it hasn't. Like, something's going on here, and I need to figure that out. So that's sort of the perspective. So yeah, there's these 6 steps I follow with every trial, no matter what it is. And some of them I have to get into a little bit more detail depending what the research is. But other ones, like a sowing rate yield trial, I do those in my sleep now. I've got it all dialed in, and it makes it super easy. So the more you do something, the easier it's going to get, the faster it's going to get. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of what the process, looks like for me.
That's awesome. So can you give us an example of some of the projects you're working on right now, research-wise? Sorry, I'll let you take a drink.
This is good.
We appreciate you very much, Chris.
Yeah, so I'll give you 3 examples. So one is like the sowing rate yield trial. I mean, we all kind of do these, I need to know what the sowing rate is for this crop, so I try a few different ones and see what the results are. Now, I do all those in like 5x5 trays. I've got like a tall one and a short one. I mean, and that allows me to do a lot of stuff in a small space. And you just do the math to get the equivalent in a 10-20 tray, or a paper pot tray, or another tray. It's just your sowing rate by area. So that allows that to happen really quickly. And like I said, like, all this information, your temperature, your humidity, all that stuff is super important. And then the documenting it is super important. So I do a lot of those. And part of it is me getting familiar with the crop because I haven't grown it before. And part of it is like people are using these sowing rates and they're sharing these sowing rates, but either they're sharing yields that aren't enough, or they're sharing yields that are way too much for the crop cycle, they're saying. And so, yeah, I want to be able to provide those data and that information with the methodology that got it there. So if you sowed this much and got this yield, well, that doesn't tell me anything if I don't know what the temperature was. I know I got results in 8 days with my broccoli that another research project got in 12 days. So there's differences there. And so I'm always looking for an ideal crop cycle, ideally the shortest one. And so, yeah, that's what I do a lot of. I mean, I've almost always got something like that going. So that's the big one. And the key thing there is finding what I call your peak sowing rate. So as a general concept, I call it the sowing rate yield curve. As your sowing rate goes up, your yield goes up. But it's going to hit a plateau, at which point the yield is going to start going down. And that's because you've got too much density, the crop starts to compete with itself. You're going to get disease issues and yada, yada. So I want to create that curve. And for that curve, there's an equation that comes with it. And that's going to determine my sort of peak sowing rate or a range within there. I could maybe go a little more or a little less, and that helps you account for airflow and things like that. So that kind of curve is one thing I'm basically trying to generate for a lot of crops. So that's the big one. And everybody's doing that. And everybody should continue to do that. And I'll often do that with different lots of seed, especially sunflower. Every sunflower lot of seed to me is just a new crop. And so that's a key thing.
Yep, pretty much.
Yes. So second one is, okay, so this is the one I was talking about earlier. And this is the first kind of like growing approach to microgreens that's had me excited in a while. And it's work I do, paid work I do for Modern Grower, who I do some research work with. And that is a new a seeding method using a drop seeder instead of seeding anything by hand. So this is the Modern Grower drop seeder here. And farmers will be familiar with this because they're doing this to do their transplants. You know, you can just do like your 72 cell trays, your 128 cell trays, seed everything, one click, it's done. It's an amazing time saver, but it can also be used for sowing microgreens. And so, but I went into this thinking like, oh, this isn't going to work. I mean, all these little holes and trying to get things spaced out and trying to get the seeding rate right. There's just no way. And I started doing the trial, and I couldn't get it to work. And I was like, well, what's going on here? It's like I was starting to give up. But the thing that was key there was I needed to learn to use the tool first. So it wasn't that the tool was a problem. It's that the tool, I needed to fine tune how I used it. And that's the same with this, like a Jang seeder, you know, your water nozzle, your irrigation timer, your knife. I mean, everything's a little different. So that is really, really key. It was getting to know that. And then once I dialed it in, it became this thing. I was like, wow, this is a game changer for me because it really does allow me to sow a certain number of crops really uniformly, which is key. But then what was a surprise to me is like really consistently. So when you've got a scale, you can get 32.5 grams per tray easily. You know, you're just weighing it. You've got the exact amount of seed every time. And in this, you can't get that exact amount. You're not going to get 32.5 grams of seed every time, but you're going to get a narrow range that is absolutely fine and just as good, and in a way better because the seed is always going to be dropped really uniformly. And so that uniformity makes a big difference in the reliability of the growth. So that to me was a big game changer because I'm pretty big on precision. But this is just a different type of precision. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that, and yeah, I'm going to continue to work with that. But that's a really fun one to work with. Now the third one is doing research on lighting, and I'm already set up for that in this space. So I have 3 different types of lights behind. Basically, different wattage, different light color. You can't see anything with that on. It's way too bright. But they're all slightly different. This is more pink. This one up here is more yellow, and then we've got some more to the more sort of like classic white up top. Your sort of high K values there. So I'm really interested in this research, but I have a gap in my lighting knowledge. I mean, I know quite a bit, but there's a whole field of lighting out there in greenhouses. And they've already figured all this stuff out. So instead of me trying to figure everything out, like, what do we do? What is this? I've stepped back and sort of educated myself. So, I mean, for me, and some of this goes back a few years, it's like changing the language I use. I mean, you hear people on the forums talking about like lumens and watts. I mean, that means nothing to me. Lumens means nothing to me. Watts just tells me how much it's going to cost me, right? So it's like this shifting in how I talk about lights and how I work with them in order to do good research. So I haven't done a lot of light research because I really want to get that knowledge dialed in so I know it really well. And so I'm taking like a quick online greenhouse lighting course to get that stuff dialed in. Through the process, I'm sort of developing spreadsheets so I can do calculations really easily based on these different formulas. And basically, it's going to be like, this is how, you know, my outcome will be, this is how you calculate, given a certain light, how long it should be on, and what distance it should be from your crop. And so it's a standardized method, ideally, that most people can use to determine their lighting, as opposed to like, hey, what lights do you use? I use these 12 hours a day. Again, there's way too much information missing for that information to be really valuable. I mean, these are all LEDs, but I also have fluorescence. And so I can get all the same values from those two lights, but the fluorescents are going to give off more heat. So that's going to make a difference in crop growth. So there's all these different factors, and especially as the crop grows, your light quality changes as the crop grows. So yeah, there's this gap that I'm going to fill before I really do that research. And so when I do it, the research is going to be more effective, more successful, and hopefully have a better outcome because of it.
That's amazing. Yeah, there's a lot there to go through, trial and do stuff, especially with lighting. I always see the questions, everybody's 12, 18, 24, nobody really knows what light you're using. So it makes a big difference. So I agree with that in lighting for sure. Can you tell us more of the concepts you're designing in the Microgreen Research Lab? Can you go more into that?
What do you mean? Is this like a viewer question?
Yeah, that's a question that I kind of got here. Jess, can you do more of that?
So like when you're looking at how to design a research project that you're working on, you're doing your replications. In such a small space, how are you able to design these trials? Are you doing multiples at the same time, or is it specifically one trial at a time?
Yeah, I mean, one reason I use these is to make doing trials in a small space much easier. And I can do multiples at a time. I mean, I've got 2 shelves here and space for another. And so I could be doing, I've got measurements everywhere. So I could be doing sowing rate yield trials over here, and then I could be doing lighting trials over here easily. I could be doing the same thing in both spaces. That's fine because I'm recording the data for both. Now, there could be conflicts. I can't do lighting research here and then temperature research over here because I can't have different temperatures in these areas. So this becomes a lighting and temperature research project where one is just temperature. So the stuff I'm doing at the same time they have to be compatible. So yeah, it may even be day length. I mean, I can't have lights going on one side for 18 hours and the other for 16, because when the 16-hour lights go off, the 18-hour ones are still on and they're going to affect growth. So I do need to think about things like that. But generally, I'm using one shelf at a time. And yeah, doing multiple things at a time is not very difficult at all, actually.
I love the little 5x5s doing that, research in that, do research in that, figuring out what grows good in that, and multiply it over. We've done similar to that. We got some soil. We'll grow in the 5x5s and do 8 different crops within that one 10-20 tray to find out how that soil works for all of the products, not just one product, to find out if it's going to be good for us. So we've done similar things like that. So that's good to see. We bought them 5x5s for dirt project. Didn't work out, so we use them for research now and testing things and seeing if the soil is going to work or what environment's going to work good for that product. So definitely do the same similar things.
Yeah, it's key. And I mean, part of that is part of it saves, part of it cost. I mean, I think for one of these trays, it's about 4 grams of 4.5 grams of broccoli seed versus 30 grams for 10 on the tray. So if I want to do lots of replicates and I want to do multiple trials, it's really going to keep the cost down. Now that said, I mean, this gives me a sowing rate per unit area, which is theoretical for a 1020 tray or a paper pot tray or something else. So I will do trials with the bigger trays as well, just not a ton of them and a lot of replicates, because sometimes it is different. I find when I'm increasing the area, my sowing rate goes down a little bit, and when I lower the area, it goes up a little bit. So the proportionality doesn't always work exactly, which is why I always work in a range. My seeding rate might be 28 to 32 grams for something. And so as long as I'm within there, it's probably going to be consistent. And yeah, sometimes the 30 is going to work just as good as the 32, and the 28, it's going to vary. So yeah. So I had a follow-up. I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, it'll come eventually. Andy?
Yeah, I have one last question, Chris. What out of all the research you've done so far, what is the one thing that just absolutely blew your mind? There's like no way you thought this was going to work, and magically it completely changed the way you looked at a specific thing. If you have any particular example that you'd like to share.
I mean, I don't think anything's blown my mind. Too old to have my mind blown at this point. But yeah, I mean, the one which I mentioned was using the drop seeder. I went into it like, this isn't going to work. It's my job to promote this thing, and once I learned how to use it, it just became this. And I've got this data where like the standard deviation is like 0.5 gram for like 5 or 6 sowings. So it's this amazingly accurate tool in a way I didn't think was possible. So that was a game changer. And I'm not doing commercial production right now, but if I was doing like radishes, brassicas, radish brassicas, anything with that sort of small round seed, this would just make that so much easier. You can't do it with peas and sunflower and corn and that big seeded stuff. That still needs to be done by hand. But yeah, for all the small stuff, it's brilliant. And then I do think, seeing some of the sowing rates that I have long held as, this is the sowing rate. I mean, my go-to sowing rate for sunflower has increased 60% from what I would have sort of typically done. So I've played with sowing rates for years. And when I first started growing as part of my directed studies, I had so many. My first sunflower shoot trials in 2008, I was measuring cotyledon length and width and the stem length and weighing. It was just like doing the average weight of 10 shoots. So much, way more detail than ever needs to be done. And so kind of going back and revisiting sort of what I thought were the optimum rates, kind of reminds me like my growing methods have changed, my skills have changed. Maybe the soil mix I'm using now is better. So yeah, it allows me to go back and sort of revisit sort of preconceived notions I have about what the perfect crop is or what the possible yield is. And I think with my sunflower trials, so I think like I had sowing rates like 100 grams to producing about 1,100 grams of product. And I've produced that much before, but not in a very long time. So it really did just, really sort of changed. And that changes the economics. I have the shortcut I use that, okay, if I use this size clamshell and at this price, here's all the different pricing variations. And all of a sudden that the value of that crop has gone up quite a bit because now you can shift it down and for the same price, get more units out of it.
Awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, convert pennies worth of seed into dollars worth of actual product in the end. That's where it's at.
Yes, and that's it. What's a few more grams of seed, even 10 or 20 more grams of seed, that quickly converts into way more revenue. So yes, I don't skimp out on seed or soil. It just pays off so much in terms of either save time or increased yields. So yeah, your savings versus your increased revenue aren't even comparable. The tricky thing is dealing with disease. If you're too dense and you're trying to push it too far, so it's like, this is the maximum. So I think I've kind of like 200, I know we can do it, but 175 is still pretty good for a sowing rate, and the disease risk goes down there. And I'm not producing enough to know if the disease will come in, but I've done enough of the trials to be like, 175 is still producing quite a good amount, and I think the airflow is better. So let's just stick with that.
Awesome. Definitely interested in that drop seeder. If that would help speed things up, I'm assuming it'd be a little bit more accurate in covering. That's seems like a pretty good tool that might be something to use in the future for sure.
Yeah, it is, and it's always a matter of there are other types of seeders as well that I've played, but this one and again, it's like the littlest technique change made it viable. So I think with a lot of things, I remember the first time I used it like a push seeder in the field, I'm like, these are stupid. How do people use these? But it's like using any tool, like like a band saw or whatever it is. You need to learn to use it, and then over time you become better. So yes, I think it's a tool that starts off like, oh my god, this is so frustrating. Why is it jamming? Why is it this? Well, because I've done something wrong. Yeah. So yeah, once I got past that, it just became this quick thing, and then it was just like, oh my god, this is so fast. So yeah, I've been loving that.
Got a question for you here. Looking ahead, what do you think are long-term goals for the microgreens research and the industry as a whole?
Good question. I mean, there's a couple things. One, as I mentioned, is having more consistent like sowing rates and expected yields. And again, there's no point sharing a sowing rate or a yield without the temperature data, without the days to maturity, without the methodology. No point at all. So I've been more mindful of that, because I'll often just be like, 30 grams, that's what I use. But 30 grams at 24 degrees Celsius, covered for 3 days, this life value. Then it becomes more accurate. And then the other one maybe is, another conversation that comes a lot that I will probably not get into because the cost is nutrition value. There's a lot of information out there which I have yet to find citations for. And then some stuff I think is fairly reliable. So I think some good space for like understanding the nutrition within crops. And some crops are pretty well known, and other ones are like, well, I'm just going to take the value of the seed or the value of the mature crop and apply it to it. And that doesn't really work. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff online that's just inaccurate or unstated. And for me, I mean, as a researcher and as an academic or former academic, that's important for me. So when I find stuff, it's like, well, I want to put this in my report, but I can't. I mean, I have no reference to where this data comes from. So I think, the nutritional stuff, and it's getting better. There's research stuff happening all over the place. I mean, again, I papers email to me all the time. So I think that would be an interesting one to do. But it's expensive to get the testing done. So I think for the small scale grower, that's something that's a little out of reach.
Yeah, for sure. You have to be a lot of money influxed into getting them trials done and testing and find out what your nutrition is for your crop. It could be different. There's different way to grow, different soil, are going to different mediums, so it's going to be a wide range. It's never going to be 100% accurate, even if you take papers that are out there from other researchers. Where were they growing? What were their conditions? So it's going to be totally not equivalent to what you're doing publicly. So,
yeah, exactly.
Chris, is there anything else that you would like to cover or show everything?
Well, I am in the seed lab here. I could show you a few things. I mean, I was going to talk about like some of the tools I use. And then, I mean, again, these are things that you're all using and little things that I can have. But I have quite of these little things, little cups. I mean, I just have, dozens of these. So for soaking seeds, for separating my seeds, for doing trialing, I've got all these different numbers written on them for all the different seeding rates. So that allows me to sort of prepare everything ahead of time and make sure it's all laid out, just so I think really well structured. Using a timer for irrigation. I'm doing some experimenting with different irrigation methods now. So having a timer that comes on and off and gets recorded is great. Of course, I have a scale. I do have, and I don't have it here, like a PAR meter. So a PAR meter measures like photosynthetic light, the light that plants are using to grow. And that, that's the sort of device you need to start getting an idea of your lighting information. So I do like lighting maps for all my lights. Like, okay, at this height and in this spot, what's the value? How much light am I getting there? So that's been really interesting. I use a little infrared thermometer. So this allows me to tell the difference between the leaf temperature and the air temperature. That allows us to calculate vapor pressure deficit, which is a much more useful measure than humidity for growth. Though maybe not as useful in microgreens as it is in other crops. But when we talk about temperature and humidity levels, there's a relationship there also relative to the air temperature and the leaf temperature. So things like that are trying to refine those more. So we're using accurate information there. I do have some trials going here. Let's attempt.
Yes.
Somehow they do. This new camera has a nice long cord.
Nice.
So, okay, so this is, these are the 5x5 trays, and I think I've got, let's see, 6, 7, 30, about 32 different trays there. So I think 16 crops growing. So these are a combination of brassicas, radishes, actually all brassicas and radishes and some mustards. And they are, I'm basically doing these for photos. So I want to be able to contrast these different varieties in terms of so they just got uncovered today after 3 days of germination. So I want to photo document what they look at that point. So it can be like, this is what your crop could or should look like after 3 days. Then I want to be able to do close-ups of stems and leaves to get that variety differentiation, just for some more comparisons there. For watering, these guys are on a capillary mat, so that's some trialing I'm doing there. And I have 2 of these. One of them is on a timer, and one of them uses a ceramic sensor. So it just automatically waters when the sensor gets dry, and that kind of does it automatically. So playing with different methods, like watering is it's a gong show in the microgreens world, as you two know. And finding the right methodology has been really tricky. I know we do overhead, we do flood, we do all these different methods, and a lot of them do work fine. This is sort of, trying this method, and I'm really stoked about these ceramic sensors, their potential there, but the timer is probably just as accurate. So looking at methodologies there, and like I do with a lot of my projects, I mean, there's data for the capillary mat. So I do all these calculations based on how quickly the water should move and how much water a certain area can hold. So I kind of have this framework that I can use to come up with a relatively standardized method. And for this sort of thing, because of different growing rates and different crops, it's hard to totally standardize things, but you can model things to a certain point, which takes away that learning curve for people. And then you just sort of adjust on the fly. So it gets you as close, very, very close to your optimum conditions very quickly. And then you adjust from there, as opposed to like major trial and error, like no idea where to start. So I'm going to do all these different things. And part of that is, I mean, as I'm sure you two know, there's a lot of like seeding guides out there that are ridiculous. They were put together years ago so people would click on that website and find some information. But I mean, it's like clear that nobody's ever tried those rates. I mean, if they had, they would know that they're not very good. So so when I provide information, I want to have a really good basis for its validity. I mean, that just comes from doing academic work, and as a longtime grower in the community, I mean, providing just random, inaccurate information is not doing anybody a service at all.
Yeah, most of them seeding charts, I would say, out there are by seed companies, and they're in the business of selling seeds.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind when how much they put in there. They want to sell you more seeds. They don't make money by not selling you seeds. So keep that in mind. And then, like Chris said, it's probably 10, 20 years, maybe dated information as well out there, because they're not in the business of updating and doing trials and figuring stuff out. Obviously, they're just putting something together for you so you have a baseline to start with. And all of anybody's information is going to be a baseline for you to start with. Like Chris was saying, it's just going to be a baseline for you to start with, hopefully getting you closer by Chris's research and trials here for us, is it's getting you closer to being more accurate. So you get a much bigger head start than you would otherwise. And then you don't have as much trials, and hopefully maybe you only have to do 2 trials and you're good to go, not 3 or 4 or 5 and stuff. So we do appreciate Chris a lot for doing all the research he's doing. If you do not know Chris's channel, Chris, what's your channel that you have all this stuff going on?
So on YouTube, it's I think it's Microgreens Lab or Microgreens Research Lab. That's where I post most stuff that's sort of like publicly available. I mean, some of the research I'm doing is for others, and so that's their information for the time being. And I do post stuff on our Instagram page for Seedleaf as well. Just to sort of, share some of the stuff that's going on. I might have some other stuff out there, but I don't know what is relevant to this project and which isn't. Too many things going on. So
you can find him. Just look up Chris Thoreau's name. You probably will find him if you just Google him, and you'll find all the information for him, where he's at. Obviously, he's had a lot of information out there because he's been doing this for a very long time. Although he's still a very young man, but he's been doing this for a very long time. So we appreciate Chris being here today. We will get in for our live audience today. We're going to get into the Q&A. If you're watching this on the replay, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.